London, 1897. Gas lamps flicker through dense fog as horse-drawn carriages clatter down cobblestone streets. In the shadowed back office of the Lyceum Theatre, Bram Stoker haunts his desk, accompanied by stacks of books and crumpled papers. By day, he manages the massive ego of actor Henry Irving. But as darkness falls, he is obsessed with creating the perfect monster. He couldn't have known that 25 years later, his widow, Florence Stoker, would wage war on his behalf against a German filmmaker who dared to take his creation like a thief in the night, thus launching a crusade to destroy every copy of what would become one of the horror genre's most influential films, Nosferatu. Bram Stoker was a man devoted to story. Perhaps not so different from you or I, desperate to make sense of the world through the characters and settings of one's nightmares. His famous Dracula was not born from a single flash of inspiration. For 7 years, Stoker worked like a man possessed, haunting the British Museum's reading room. He devoured maps of Eastern Europe, historical accounts, and folklore collections. He interviewed Hungarian travelers about their homeland, studied Transylvanian train timetables with obsessive detail, and filled notebook after notebook with everything from local customs to weather patterns. Believe me, I asked. He told me.
We had a seance.
we had a seance, he told me everything. His research bordered on manic. Relatable, a writer. This meticulous research would birth not one, but 2 distinct vampire legends. The charismatic and sophisticated Count Dracula, and through F.W. Murnau's unauthorized adaptation, the rat-like and grotesque Count Orlok of Nosferatu. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Neverland Book Club. As you can tell, today's video is slightly different, though as always still within the realm of books and storytelling. The vampire tales before Stoker were far more simplistic. Bloated corpses terrorizing peasant villages, or straightforward supernatural threats like those in Le Fanu's Carmilla. But in Stoker's feverish imagination, something far more complex was taking shape. The historical Vlad the Impaler was known to have provided inspiration, lending his nickname, Dracula, son of the dragon, and aristocratic bearing to Stoker's depiction of the Count. But Stoker's creation transcended this. Through an intricate web of letters, diary entries, and newspaper clippings, he would craft a monster that straddled 2 worlds, an ancient evil that could navigate 19th century London society while harboring unimaginable powers of influence and seduction. His vampire would be both a refined aristocrat and a primal horror, as comfortable at the opera as in his tomb. Same, Dracky. Same. In doing so, Stoker didn't just write a novel, he created a dark mirror reflecting society's deepest fears and spawning a century-long artistic divide between 2 very different visions of vampiric evil. When Bram Stoker died in 1912, his creation was still lurking in relative obscurity, but across war-torn Europe, a German filmmaker was about to unleash a controversy that would transform both Dracula's legacy and cinematic history. Murnau had a vision. One that would pit artistic ambition against legal rights, and one widow's determination against an entire film industry, which sounds a lot more ominous now, but keep in mind this was the early 1900s. The story begins in 1921 when Murnau faced a crucial decision. In his attempt to adapt Dracula to the new age of film, the author's widow, Florence Stoker, fiercely guarded her husband's legacy and flatly refused to sell the film rights. Murnau made a fateful choice. If he couldn't have Dracula legally, he would reimagine it entirely. Or try to, at least. Do you want to be part of the production now? He would transform Stoker's refined Count into something born from Germany's collective post-war trauma, a rat-like harbinger of plague and decay. Fun, just not as sexy. He's just here now. He called it Nosferatu, and the production was plagued by its own dark legends. Max Schreck, whose very name meant maximum terror in German, disappeared so completely into his role that crew members whispered he might be an actual vampire. He would only film at night, never ate with the crew, and maintained his ghoulish appearance even when cameras weren't rolling. Actors, am I right? They haven't changed in 100 years. But these weren't just publicity stunts. They reflected the film's deeper resonance with a nation still reeling from war and economic collapse. When Florence Stoker discovered Nosferatu in 1922, her response was swift and merciless. She saw not artistic interpretation, but plain and blatant theft. Not homage, but plagiarism. The legal battle that followed became almost as legendary as the stories themselves. Florence demanded every copy of the film be destroyed, every frame burned. German courts agreed, ordering the destruction of all prints and negatives. But, like any powerful curse, Nosferatu refused to die. Film enthusiasts, recognizing its artistic significance, began secretly copying and preserving prints. An underground network of cinephiles emerged, screening the forbidden film in private gatherings paintings and protecting copies from destruction. The very act of trying to destroy it had transformed Nosferatu into something mythical, a piece of forbidden art that refused to stay buried. Meanwhile, the film's visual language was already seeping into cinema's bloodstream. Murnau's expressionist nightmare, with its elongated shadows, Gothic architecture, and pestilential count, offered a stark alternative to Stoker's aristocratic vampire. Where Count Dracula represented the seductive danger of the old world, Count Orlok embodied pure, unredeemable evil. This artistic schism would shape vampire fiction for the next century, creating two distinct lineages of cinematic monsters. Florence Stoker's crusade, though ultimately unsuccessful in erasing Nosferatu, achieved something perhaps more significant. It forced the vampire genre to evolve. Future filmmakers would have to choose sides or find ways to bridge the divide between Dracula's sophisticated menace and Orlok's primal horror. The tension between these two visions, one born from Victorian anxieties, the other from post-war trauma, would become a defining feature of horror cinema. What had started as a legal battle over adaptation rights became something far more profound, a struggle over the very nature of horror itself. Should monsters seduce us or repulse us? I mean, ask a book girly and we'll say both, but that's beside the point. Should they mirror our poise and elegance or embody our basest fears? Nosferatu's survival ensured these questions would haunt filmmakers for generations to come. Like a vampiric family tree splitting into rival houses, these traditions would shape popular culture in profoundly different ways. Hollywood's first major vampire film, Universal's 1931 Dracula, firmly planted its flag in Stoker's camp. Bela Lugosi's hypnotic performance, with his formal wear and theatrical accent, became so iconic that it nearly erased Stoker's original vision of a white-haired nobleman. Yet, even here, Nosferatu's influence crept in through the shadows. The film's German expressionist cinematography and Gothic atmosphere owed a clear debt to Murnau's forbidden masterpiece. The 1950s and 60s saw Hammer Horror's Christopher Lee reshape the Count once again. His Dracula walked a razor's edge between sophistication and savagery, a refined predator who could explode into bestial fury. Shot in vivid Technicolor, these films suggested that perhaps the divide between Dracula and Orlok wasn't so absolute after all. Every elegant vampire might harbor a monster beneath their polished veneer. The 1970s marked a crucial turning point. Werner Herzog's bold Nosferatu the Vampire from 1979 directly confronted the duality by casting Klaus Kinski as both Count Dracula and a creature resembling Orlok. This wasn't just homage, it was a philosophical statement suggesting these seemingly opposed vampires might be two faces of the same immortal evil. That same year, Stephen King's Salem's Lot adaptation introduced Kurt Barlow, a vampire who could shift between cultured European gentlemen and pure Nosferatu-style horror, implying that every charming vampire might be hiding a monstrous truth. The 1980s and 90s saw division play out across popular culture. Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles embraced and elevated Dracula's atmospheric lineage, creating immortals who were essentially Gothic rock stars grappling with existential questions. Meanwhile, films like The Lost Boys and Near Dark reimagined vampires as punk rock predators, mixing seduction with savage violence. There was a Dracula in Buffy. There was an episode. I think it was season 5, episode 1. It was season 5, episode 1. She's patrolling, she's in the cemetery, and she's fighting, and he's very Dracula. He's very aristocratic, and he has like a whole, and that's right! Oh my god! And he says, "I'm Dracula," and she says, "Get out!" And then it's the opening sequence. She kills him in the end. She kills him, and then he keeps coming back, and she's like, "Can you please stay dead?"
You think I don't watch your movies? You always come back.
And Xander becomes his familiar. He's like eating bugs and spiders, and he gets really annoyed by it. Can we watch Buffy? The apex of this synthesis came from the GOAT, Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula, where Gary Oldman's shape-shifting Count embodied every vampire tradition at once. Romantic lover, aristocratic predator, and bestial monster. Modern interpretations continue to draw from both wells. 30 Days of Night fully embraced Nosferatu's vision of vampires as apex predators, while Only Lovers Left Alive presented them as pretentious immortal artists. The Twilight Saga, for all its innovations, essentially repackaged the Dracula-Nosferatu divide for young adults. The civilized Cullens versus savage newborns, though I doubt that was a conscious decision on a certain writer's part. Even What We Do in the Shadows, and if you haven't seen it, you really should, finds its humor in contrasting vampiric flamboyance with brutal reality. Yeah, just that.
It's a lot of stuff. stuff on the floor down here, Peter, and it's a spinal column.
Peter! Why do they call him Peter? This influence extends far beyond vampire stories. The modern zombie genre, particularly films like 28 Days of Night, draws heavily from Nosferatu's vision of vampirism as infectious plague. The entire urban fantasy genre owes a debt to Dracula's template of supernatural creatures hiding within modern society. Every story about immortal beings struggling with their monstrous nature, from True Blood to The Vampire Diaries, emerges from this fundamental divide. Perhaps most fascinating is how these traditions reflect evolving social fears. Dracula's lineage often explores themes of class, sexuality, and power, immortals struggling with their place in modern society. Nosferatu's descendants typically deal with primal fears, disease, death, and the collapse of civilization itself. In times of stability, vampire stories tend toward the seductive Dracula mode. In periods of social upheaval, like perhaps in the wake of a global pandemic, Nosferatu's children come crawling back from the shadows. Ironic. Today, as our world faces challenges both new and old, vampire fiction continues to evolve. Modern creators freely mix elements from both traditions, recognizing that our fears, like our monsters, refuse to stay in neat categories. What began as a legal battle between a widow and a filmmaker has become a lasting artistic dialogue about the nature of horror itself. The dual legacy of Count Dracula and Count Orlok reminds us that sometimes the most powerful stories are those that refuse to die, even when the law demands their destruction. Like the undead themselves, they find new ways to survive, adapt, and sink their fangs into each new generation's imagination. Now, as you can imagine, this video did not come about unprompted. After viewing Robert Eggers' latest adaptation of Nosferatu, it was difficult to find things I disliked about the film. That's not to say there was nothing to dislike. There were moments where I couldn't help but roll my eyes, but there were even more moments where my heart was racing, my face split into a grin, and my skin just erupted in gooseflesh, in response to witnessing the execution of a perfect shot. I also appreciated what Eggers chose to add to his version of the narrative, parallels between Nosferatu and Dracula that were not present in the 1920s version. Things like Ellen's destiny entwined with the monster, having a strong connection to him from childhood. Now, I didn't appreciate her basically being a pig raised for slaughter, but okay. Like, fine. Their sexual nature giving the film a more seductive air without it actually coming off as sexy. Something Coppola's adaptation capitalized on unapologetically. That shot when Winona Ryder's going down the stairs. Lily Rose Depp, I feel, nailed the character in a way no one else could. From her eyes to her voice, the switch she embodies in some scenes, her gradual transformation from reluctant to willing sacrifice was believable and tragic. Anya Taylor-Joy was supposed to play Ellen, and no shade to her, she's fantastic, but I think they made the better choice in the end.
Do you know if that was a choice or if there was some disagreement? Like they were forced to find someone?
I have no idea. I wasn't part of that meeting, sadly. I was out of town. Now for the lore. It's different, yet the same story. Nosferatu being a man forged from the seed of a demon in the soil plagued by Black Death, which is why he is the embodiment of the plague itself, spreading it through the transmission of rats. Even his iconic bite, like that of a rat, rather than the more seductive bite of Count Dracula. I was also promised Willem Dafoe. And although, yes, he's in the film, I thought his character should have been written a bit more to his abilities. I felt as though the character he played was lacking a little, holding him back from what we all want to see from his performance. Like in The Lighthouse, he's Walked Like a Dog by Edward Cullen. Oh my god, a vampire. Also, why did Count Orlok look like Rasputin? Because that's all I could think of every time his shadowy form took over the screen. The mustache was unnecessary. I've never seen a corpse with such a healthy mustache. And so was that full frontal, though I'm not complaining. That was shocking in a good way. That was like, oh, did you see that? Because I saw that. Apparently it was a prosthetic. That made me sad. That, again, I feel added to Eggers' style of using nudity and sexuality as a method of discomfort rather than interest. Which, okay, you do you, Bobby. But that voice, I can still hear it. When people kept raving that Bill Skarsgård is unrecognizable, I thought, well, yeah, he's playing a corpse. I would hope so. But that voice, that's what really sold the entire performance. His accent, the cadence, the tenor, every word spoken is like the lowest string on a cello, vibrating at a frequency meant to rise unease. I think out of everything they nailed in this film, the casting, the directing, cinematography, atmosphere, lighting, acting, writing, costume design, set design, all of it was so well done. But that voice was by far my favorite part. Imagine that voice narrating all those monster romances. That's one audiobook I wouldn't speed through. I would be like, slow down, honey. Let me hear it again. Anyway, above all, my main complaint was that it wasn't exactly scary. It was supposed to be the scariest film of the year, and not once was I scared. Uncomfortable, yes. But frightened? Not exactly. Perhaps I've just been too desensitized to the genre, having watched horror predominantly my entire life, or perhaps the thoughts that plague my mind simply cannot be matched by the physical world. Either way, I wouldn't say the film is scary. It has some moments of gore and thrills, but it's nothing you'd rather watch during the day. Quite the contrary, actually. Watch it at night. Hades, you want to join me for the outro? All right. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you're not. Also, if you have the time and interest, I highly recommend seeing Nosferatu in theaters. It's been said many times before, every frame of this film feels like a Gothic painting, something to be admired on a larger scale. No one paid me to say that. I'd go watch the film again just to lose myself in that voice. All right, I'm gonna go help him find that laser thing that's been going around. Stay lost, keep reading and watching, and remember, nobody can save you. Goodbye.
He's coming!
Oh, now you're chill? London, 1897. Gas lamps flicker through dense fog as horse-drawn carriages clatter down cobblestone streets. Goodbye. If I put this... Oh. The charismatic and sophisticated Dracula. So sophisticated.